Rad-Ish. Welcome to Rad-Ish, the podcast where we spotlight people who shape counterculture and champion alternative ways of living through their passions.
Welcome, everyone. This is a very cold morning in Amsterdam, and today at Rad-Ish we are sitting with Sahand Sahebdivani. I'm sorry if I pronounced
that was quite
wrong
good, actually.
your surname. I didn't want to butcher it. So he's a storyteller and cultural facilitator here in Amsterdam, let alone founder of Mezrab, which is the most iconic storytelling space in the city. And what started as a living room tradition actually has grown into a community of people where stories bring people together. And in this episode, I'm very honored to have the possibility to dive a little bit into your personal story, your heart, but also how and what Mezrab came to be for the city. So welcome.
Thank you.
It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to start this chat by asking a little bit from you and your personal story. Storytelling seems to have been part of your life from very early on, so I'm very interested in which role did it take growing up?
Absolutely. Well, I guess you have to know that I wasn't born here. I was born in Iran in 1980, and then in 1983 in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war, and not necessarily because of the war, but because of the political persecution of communists. Both of my parents were communists at the time. Their friends were being arrested and they were being killed. We had to leave. And the plan was for us to go to Canada, but we got stuck in Amsterdam. And it was total luck.
Interesting deviation.
But I like it because it meant we arrived in a place that the Iranian community hadn't discovered yet. You know, in Canada, probably we would have encountered a big community of Iranians, and we would have kind of followed the path that was laid out for us. And here we could really discover ourselves and discover this city and discover what we want to give to this city and what we can receive from this city. It was much more of an organic meeting between a family of immigrants and a beautiful place. And you also have to know that Amsterdam in the 80s was a dirty, beautiful place. It was a poor place compared to now. Somewhere in the 90s it flipped, but in the 80s, you know, places were cheap, relatively. People didn't have so much money. You would be surrounded by working class families, and it was a city which was very idealistic. You know, this was in the height of the squatting scene, and my first friends in school were squatters because they were the ones who, the friends of my kindergarten mates, the squatting families were the ones who would take in my family, and they would help us and make sure that we knew what to do in the city. And this also made me very much attached to the real kind of punky, dirty, authentic Amsterdam.
Yes. And when is it maybe a moment or some years, you were pretty young when you arrived in the city. There was a moment that shifted from telling stories being something traditional, something personal, something familiar, into something that you wanted to do with people, with the community. Do you remember what did shift happen?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I have to say that, quite often when people know that I'm Iranian and I talk about the tradition of storytelling in Iran, they think that that's the reason why I'm a storyteller. In reality, the tradition of storytelling isn't even that alive in Iran.
Okay.
Because young people in Iran, they go to cinema, they go to theater, they read books, they get illegal copies of series of Netflix, HBO, When I would meet people, they were always telling me, did you see the latest episode of 24, the series? They wouldn't tell me, oh, did you go to a great storytelling? So this idea of storytelling being a tradition, it's a little bit dead. It's a little bit in a museum.
Okay.
I became a storyteller because for my father as an immigrant, storytelling was the only way to keep me connected to my culture and my history in a time of exile. So it's not a tradition. It is the reality, the lived experience of an immigrant family, of diaspora. It's very much how a diaspora retains their culture, passes on their culture, right? It's the vehicle through which I kept the language. I've never been back to Iran since the age of 3. My Persian is almost fluent. right, is because of the stories that my father would tell me. So yes, he told me the traditional stories, the ancient stories of the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. He also told me the story of his friends being killed, him being a political prisoner, going to the mountains with his friends, meeting my mother, not being allowed to marry her because she comes from a very traditional and religious family, and my father was a communist who smoked and drank, right?
Yes.
So this is a new tradition. Now, when I realized that I have access to these beautiful stories that humanize my parents, and that a lot of people don't have access to them, actually, I didn't even think storytelling as a profession will be something that we can share with an audience. I just wanted to create a space where my father would be seen as a human being. That meant a space where he can recite his poetry, where he can cook his amazing, wonderful food, the man who opened the very first Iranian restaurant in the Netherlands, where my mother can sing, her passion. She was an amazing singer, but also in Iran, singing for women was forbidden. So it happened when I was 24 in 2004,
Yes.
when I thought, okay, let's just open this place. And probably for a profession, I will do something else. But
Okay.
this is how we did it. And the first Mezrab only could fit 30 people. This is how small it was. And it was packed. It was always packed. And
It is still.
it is still. But now it's packed with 300 people,
Yes.
But I had no idea that so many people needed this place. So it wasn't that I decided, okay, now it needs to become a profession.
Yep.
It's rather that the world showed that it needs to be.
Yes. And they really, really like what you told, that it was also a mean to humanize your parents. Because I think that's, at least for me, what stories really do. They give you the possibility to have a person in front of you, and from the narration that this person has of themselves, humanize it and feel closer. And this is what happens when I, for example, go to Mezrab. I feel like it's not just listening to stories. Something happens. There is this switch. So according to you, what is that makes and creates this magic that you feel, and you're attracted to places like that are very much needed, in my opinion, in the city?
Absolutely. I think it has many different layers.
Mm-hmm.
One is that it is a very old ritual to be together and, in a sense of togetherness, listen to stories, right?
Yes.
This goes back to the very first human experiences of art, where, when the moment we could create a fire, that we would gather around the fire and people would just share their experiences. As a human being, we were evolved biologically to be communal, to share. We developed language to retain knowledge. We were evolved to be storytellers and story listeners. So the fact that there is a space that we can be together, right? And of course, in a way, listening to a podcast is also listening to a story. But there is something about the togetherness that's important. That's the first thing. The second thing is that already from the first day, and still until today, it's my parents, my mother when she was still alive, my father now still at the age of 80, who makes the food. So even the ritual of sharing food is important, and it's not just something that some kitchen staff makes who are hired to make this food for you. It is my father who does it out of a sense of wanting to include you in his space of comfort, in his space of safety, right? He wants to be your host. And this is still how he feels, even though he's too old to actually serve the soup, but he still goes there every day, makes the soup, and then leaves, knowing that what his hands made remain there, and that you can come
And people can just
they can enjoy
together.
it. Exactly.
Crazy.
This is important. But in addition to that, there is also something about the personal story that it works on two levels. One is that a personal story is always unique. You can tell a story that only you can tell. That's different from music, where you can study to learn techniques, to play the composition of a particular composer, which is also beautiful. I love it. Or it is, theater, where you can play a role, and you can play the role of Shakespeare, which also many other people have done, which also, again, is amazing. But the personal story, no one can repeat it. No one can take your story and tell it as their own. So there is something unique about the person on stage telling a personal story, but at the same time, there is something universal, because the themes that they touch, even if someone is standing there, for instance, from Mongolia, and you might be an audience member from Peru, and you might think that culturally two people couldn't be more different. the way they fall in love, the way they fall out of love, details might be different. The way their parents fight or come together, culture might be slightly different. But what is at the core of the story is very universal. So in this moment, there is a beautiful tension of some kind of a contrast between the thing that is very, very, very new to you, the individual standing in front of you, and the thing that's universal that you immediately understand. And you reflect on your own loves. You reflect on your own sense of displacement, of missing, of desire, of togetherness, of closeness. And this, I think, is part of the magic, I would say.
I think I really like this tension between what's unique and what's universal. And I think what's universal, it's emotions. It's the human experience, how you feel it. And this is what makes Mezrab, in my eyes, very special, because you really feel it in your body. You embody the place when you're there. And my question is, do you think that this kind of exchange is possible also outside the place of Mezrab, like in other spaces?
Of course. I mean, first of all, I noticed that the way that we set up these places have inspired many people to do similar things. And sometimes also different things. You know, it doesn't have to be done necessarily in the exact way that we want to do it. And actually, even the way that we do it constantly evolved. Like when I started the Mezrab, there was no stage. And it was almost part of the philosophy that there isn't a difference between what is a performer and what is an audience. You know, I wanted to break down that performance, which, by the way, I also learned, it's not something I invented. I saw that in many cultures, you know, when you go to a real flamenco experience, you know, in the south of Spain, people are together and they're doing it together as a community. And then in Amsterdam, you know, the best musicians, they're brought here, they're put on a fancy stage and people pay 20 euros for a ticket and they sit there while on stage something happens. Whereas where it came from, it was just us sitting together and playing together, right? When you go to an Irish bar, the sense of community is still very much at the core of the music experience. Again, you're not paying money to see people be on stage, and then when someone starts to sing along, that you go, shh, you know, quiet. You know, I'm there just to listen. And when I was young, before I opened the Mezrab, I would go to Irish bars because I loved this tradition. You know, tango, for instance, it was born in the brothels of Montevideo and Buenos Aires. So these are things that we did, and the fact that now Mezrab has a stage, it simply has to do with how big it is, right?
Yes.
But other people still make events that, you know, don't have a stage. They're all together. We're all kind of, it's all little. So just to say that it's not limited to the Mezrab. Other people can do it as well. And sometimes also it is offering people to cross a scary threshold, which is the threshold of entering real communication with people that you didn't know. I love Amsterdam, but one of the things that it has a hard time offering for people is a place to genuinely meet people. Because, you know, you come to a place, imagine that, you know, you're someone who had the opportunity to come to study here or to work here. You know, maybe through your job, housing is taken care of, you know, your health insurance is taken care of, public transport works, many practical things generally kind of work, right? But then how do you make friends? You go out to a bar and then you see a group of Dutch people and they are there to be with themselves, not to talk to a stranger.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So if you come from a culture where talking to strangers is a given, then how do you... So sometimes it's enough that a place like Mezrab just lowers that threshold and makes it comfortable for you to speak to a stranger. And I remember in the first years that I had the Mezrab, people would come, you know, it was the ritual. Every Saturday we're at the Mezrab, right? And most Fridays we're at the Mezrab. And then one day I'm cycling through the park and I see people sitting in the Vondelpark that I knew they met at the Mezrab.
That's
and then I'm
so
happy.
Precious.
Yes, I'm like, it happened, you know, the thing that I wanted happened. It's
Yes.
not for me to connect them so that they can keep coming to the Mezrab, but the connections happened.
Of course. And also what you said about breaking a little bit the division between performer and audience, I find it really important, especially because a storytelling night, it's not just made by the person who perform, let's say, that story, but also who engage with them and the reaction that the people
Very
listening
much.
to have.
Very much.
To that
Storytelling,
have.
it is very much a team sport. And
Yes.
our audiences are known for being very gentle and very kind. And even to the point that when we do different art forms, because we don't just do storytelling, we do stand-up comedy, that stand-up
Yes.
comedians tell themselves like, hey, don't alienate the Mezrab audience. They're very nice. Don't go there to offend them. And I think, generally you shouldn't go out to offend people. But it's nice that in the Mezrab, at least some of them have this kind of state of mind, this awareness
Yes.
that they should respect this audience.
Also of what the place brings. And I'm very interested because you personally are a performer, storyteller.
Yeah.
So in your case, when you tell a story, when you feel the need to share a snap of your personal existence with an audience, is it more for yourself because you feel the need for that story to come out, or what are you trying to do through your story? Is it more for you? Is it more for the audience? Is it more for finding the feeling of togetherness and connecting that you were talking about?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, storytelling is like a conversation. And we feel the need to have a conversation. You can't deny that the need exists inside of you as a performer, right? It would be a lie. Most people who say, I don't have a desire to perform, they're lying, I would say.
I believe so.
Rather, they're unaware, they're unaware. So we can't deny that this exists inside of us. But the same with the conversation. If I want to have a conversation with you, there is something in me that wants to have this conversation. But a conversation doesn't work if it only satisfies my needs.
Yes.
Then it becomes a monologue. And some people are not aware how much their need to have a conversation actually alienates the person they're having a conversation with. It exhausts them. They don't want to be in this conversation. It becomes interesting when you connect your desire to be heard, to be seen, to express yourself, to share the things that you're passionate about with the need of the audience, right? With the gift that you can give them, the thing that you can connect on, right? And the audience might not always be aware of it, but definitely they need to relate. Definitely it needs to feel like something that was for them and not for you as the performer. So those two needs, they need to coexist and they need to meet, right? And quite often they're not even that separate from each other, right? Because the thing that excites you or that you're passionate about, the audience can also be passionate about.
But in terms of audience, it's composed by many people, so many different needs. Do you think that in a space like Mezrab, you are able to recognize a little bit of like a common thread between people who come in that space willing to just listen to a person telling a story for a night?
I think definitely the willingness to listen is what connects them. It's very hard to say that, that everyone agrees with what they want to hear. Politically, they might be different. Age-wise, they might be different. There's a difference in gender. There's a difference in sexual orientation. But on a human level, there's definitely more things that we agree on, and even the willingness to listen to something that we might not fully agree with is something that's interesting. Or understand, absolutely, 100%. And of course, the beauty of storytelling is that it sometimes makes the thing that we don't necessarily understand immediately, in Persian we say malmus. It's something you can touch, touchable, right?
That's
if you never, but more than that, something that you can have a sensory experience of, because you might not necessarily have my experience of growing up in a diaspora, in an forced exile diaspora. But something in my stories can make that felt, feelable, if that's a word.
I guess it will be today. So we are also doing a podcast, which is in some way a space built around stories and storytelling and the willingness to listen to people. It's there. But do you ever feel that stories, especially in formats like this maybe, can become something that we just consume passively instead of something we really engage with, as it happens when you go to shared nights of storytelling?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question.
I will clarify. In formats like podcasts, stories can become something very easy to consume. You put
Yes.
your headphones on, you listen to people talking without really engaging with them. Do you think that this loses a lot of what storytelling actually is, or is it just
Okay, now I
another
get it.
form of
Yeah,
communication?
Yeah, I would be very careful with trying to define too much what storytelling is.
Yes.
You know, the term storytelling is so broad and it covers so many different things. You know, a good book or a good movie can be an incredible experience of a story being told to me, right? And I will not disqualify it because I can consume it by myself lying on a beach. You know what I mean? But it's a different aspect of it that in that moment is important. Storytelling, you know, there is once I read on the website of a storytelling school, a different one than ours, that, you know, in the old days, storytelling had different functions. One was to, you know, to offer us kind of a moral guide. One was to keep the histories, you know, to record the histories. One was to bring us news, right? One was to entertain us, right? These are different functions that storytelling has.
Yes.
And when you look at these functions, I would say that a podcast definitely ticks a few of those boxes. You know, it can entertain, it can be news. You know, I have a young brother who rarely watches the Dutch national news, which, you know, honestly I haven't listened to for many years, but might listen to the Daily Show as a podcast or a vodcast, and get his news. You know, that's great. That's storytelling, and it brings news, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, you know, in a space like the Mezrab or any similar live storytelling venue. And of course, you know, we do much more than storytelling, but there is different elements and aspects of storytelling that we emphasize or that also come to the front, right? But I don't want to say that a podcast has no value or you shouldn't call it storytelling simply because it doesn't press all those buttons.
Okay, so storytelling is a concept that, of course, can develop in many, many ways, but narrative, how you narrate an event in itself has such an impact on how people then perceive it.
Absolutely.
And I would like your take on this, also seeing the world we live in, like, lately. How much is important the choice of words that you use when you not just narrate maybe a news, so a objective event that happened, but in general, when you tell a story, how do you choose your words? How do you make sure that the feeling that you want the audience to grasp is there?
Oh, that's a very big question.
I know. I'm here to learn from you because as you feel, I'm a bit shy.
Well, honestly, I used to think a lot about, you know, our ability to tell a story is very important. And there is skills that you can develop, that you can learn. You know, you look at sentence structure, you look at your ability to build an image that people can follow, that they can feel, to make sure that you touch the different senses that people experience, so that, you know, when I bring you a story that has a smell or a sound or a taste, that the listener imagines those smells and sounds and tastes, so they're there in the narrative. And in many other ways, you know, there's many other techniques that you can just learn, which makes you a better storyteller. However, I am now in a place in my life where I feel that the people who know how to do this effectively, they don't necessarily have a great agenda. They can share something with you that can create a narrative, and it can convince you of a worldview, of a politics, of a that I don't necessarily stand behind, you know. So, for instance, I love and I'm fascinated by the national mythologies of my country.
Yes.
And I think these are incredibly powerful, beautiful stories with, you know, such a treasure trove, chest of cultural, you know, it's a treasure that we shouldn't lose. But then I see that the worst nationalists of my people, they take these narratives and they use them in a way that many of my, you know, people with my background, they get convinced of a worldview that is completely appalling for me. It goes against. So I would actually say that, you know, the technique of stories and what is important in storytelling in my view, until a few years ago, that's even something that AI can learn. Now if you're on social media, you see these very convincing stories, and they're all generated by AI. I would rather say the little words that you don't have control over, that actually betray you as a human being with its flaws.
Yes.
I think they're much more important than the deep techniques of telling a story. And that doesn't mean that technique is not important, but it is more than that. It is holding on to the heart of who we are as human beings, and make sure that that's...
And our imperfections
Exactly. And that's a scary thing that we will have to deal with the next couple of years. And I have no answers for that, because the technological developments are going so fast. And not just the development, but even as human beings, how we relate to these developments, the time that we might spend on social media, how it shapes our worldview, how much of the news we consume is passed down to us by an algorithm. I'm very happy that, the Mezrab experience, let's call it that, is very non-digital. Yes. Even though we also have a podcast, which just means that we press record and put some of the stories online. And it's also not an algorithm that selects the stories and makes sure that, this is what you hear. Yes. It's still a human.
And what you said, it's really true that the meaning making comes from both sides. It's not just how you tell a story, but also how you put yourself in hearing that story. And the meaning that you want to attach to that may be conditioned by a lot of other content that you are constantly exposed to. And I also know that Mezrab put their stories on a podcast, but the experience, I tried both, coming to the place and listening to them. The experience is very different. I feel like it's another kind of narrative, not more or less meaningful for that. But when you created that space with that characteristics, what was that you felt like it was missing in Amsterdam as a city? Because here at Rad-Ish, we are very focused on trying to explore people who tries to create spaces for what they think it's important to bring in this world. So what was missing, according to you, that was filled a little bit by the presence of something honestly, like the Mezrab?
I don't feel that I brought anything that Amsterdam was missing. I think Mezrab is very much a product of Amsterdam, but it is embodying things that Amsterdam is losing. And I think, a place where just financially there isn't the high point of entry. Like, we have ticketed events, but we keep them cheap. But the heart of the Mezrab, the thing that Mezrab is most known for, these nights are free. Yes. And then when you enter, the drinks, they're relatively cheap for Amsterdam standards. So it's a lot, I want it to be welcoming in the way that Amsterdam always was. And everything is becoming so incredibly expensive. And of course, I know that, inflation is a worldwide phenomenon, but I think in the Netherlands, sometimes we go along with it too easily. And we just, there is forces and people and organizations that actually enjoy this inflation because they keep jacking up the prices, right? So that's one thing, that I want Amsterdam to have spaces that are affordable. There is the fact that we don't do anything or almost nothing outside of the English language, which means that it also means it can connect people regardless of their background, because the reality is that English is the lingua franca of our communities, so everyone can speak it to a certain level. And even if someone thinks that they don't speak it on a very high level, they will come to a place where a lot of people on stage also might not speak it perfectly.
And they feel also welcomed by that.
Exactly. So that's another reason why, it's also the art form that brings it together. So these are all things that, for me, Amsterdam, it was about this.
Yes.
Right? And even if now it is losing some of that character, I feel that I can help with other places like OT301, with all the other places that are mentioned in the Amsterdam Alternative paper. We can still kind of hold on to it, and maybe it's holding on to a dream that will evaporate one day, and it will lose its glory, and Amsterdam will not be what it was when I arrived here in the 80s. Maybe we are holding on to something that one day will return. I don't know.
I hope so. And we do. So the last question actually that our podcast tries to pose to our guests is about hope. It's about the future. So according to you, what is the thing that you wish it could change in order to bring back this sense of community and places that serve the people and not the market in the city?
Yeah. Honestly, you're asking me a question about hope in a time that I don't necessarily feel very hopeful. You know, as an Iranian, I feel a terrible weight on my chest every day that I wake up, and I go to sleep with this terrible pain. I just managed yesterday to get news from my uncle and my cousins that they're still alive after not having had any contact with them for 3.5 weeks.
So scary.
And, you know, and that's just me as an Iranian. My wife is Palestinian. So we've had many years of just shit coming over us. I don't have anything intelligent to say about hope. However, I feel that even when you don't necessarily have hope, or you don't see that you have hope, there is something hopeful about repeating the actions, about doing just what you always did in times of hope, and that in that doing, a light will remain, will kind of stay, right? There was once someone that I spoke to who was involved in organizations related to creating democratic spaces in Iraq. Now, that person wasn't very hopeful because, you know, Iraq was never a democracy and still isn't really a democracy. So for him, you know, it's like, how can I be hopeful doing this work? But maybe just engaging with a few people, just a few people that you engage with, for them, this flame of an idea will remain alive. So if you don't feel the hope, maybe they needed that so that one day it will, you know, that little tiny little flame will turn into a big fire.
Will burn.
Exactly. So I will do what I do. I'm a father. I have kids. For them, maybe one day things will be better. And maybe when it does become better, which I hope it will, the things that I kept doing now maybe helped.
It's sparkled the change and
Exactly.
the future.
Exactly.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for this conversation and for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
In these difficult times
Of
as well,
course.
and
Thank
weather.
you. Thank you.
It was very nice. Much a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rad-Ish.